This is the first of 2 reviews of magazine games that were published with the French magazine Victis. The magazine is in French, but both games have English rules available online. The game that we talk about today is Sphacterie, was published with Victis at the end of 2010. Next review is going to cover Syracuse, the game that came with the last issue of Victis. I've decided to play and review these 2 games one after the other because they are by the same designer, they cover similar topics, they are both set in the Peloponnesian Wars, and most importantly for me, they are based on the same system, so that once I learn the system for one of the 2 games, then it is easy to pick up the other game. If I waited too long, then I would have to learn the system again. Much easier this way. So we are in the Peloponnesian Wars, so we're in ancient times, Athens versus Sparta, and today we talk about Sphacterie, a game that covers a series of land and naval engagements for the control of the island of Sphacterie and of a fortified area in Pylos. Let's see how the game handles the challenge of putting together naval units and land units in a single battle. The game comes with unmounted counters and markers. You will have to mount your own, like it was common in Victis games until a couple of issues ago. Probably you will want to mount a photocopy of the counter sheet like I did. In the magazine you have an article about the battle depicted in the game. The article starts here, continues later, and then you have the rules of the game, which are only 3 pages. The French rulebook is only 3 pages, and actually most of page 3 is just an explanation of the special event cheats that will be drawn during the game. So you do not even need to read this part before you start playing the game. So definitely very short rules, and also the rules are available in an English translation, which you can print from the website of Victis, so you have the option of playing the game even if you do not speak French. The map is printed on thick paper. I placed it on a magnetic board, and not because I played a full magnetic counter holder version of the game, but because I wanted to be able to move the map around if I needed to store it from one session of the game to the other. I wanted to have some room to take some notes, and most importantly, I wanted to be able to create my own reinforcement track, because as you can see, there are many reinforcements that are scheduled to enter the game in turns starting from turn 2, and definitely the turn track is not large enough to hold them all. Not many units start on the board at the beginning of the game, and as you can see here from the setup, you only have a small number of Athenian units that are ready to defend in the fortified area of Pylos, a reduced Athenian naval unit, and then you have some Spartan units that are ready to enter the game. These are actually pretty much all, or well, let's say most of the land units that the Spartan player can use in the game. At the beginning of each turn, each player draws 2 special event markers from a pool. Some events can be used only by the Athenian player, some other events, the yellow ones, by the Spartan player. Then you also have gray events that can be used by either player. That means that some of the markers can be used for either of the 2 effects if the right player draws it. For example, this marker can be used for this effect, or for this effect by the Spartan player. The Athenian player could use it only for this effect, and these effects will grant you different types of bonuses. They may help with movement or with combat or with reinforcements. They may hurt the opponent's reinforcements, different type of things, and you will play the markers when the effect that the marker originates applies in the turn, during movement, during combat. It depends on the marker. After drawing the markers, each player rolls 2 dice to determine initiative. The player with the highest roll goes first. The initiative roll also determines the amount of action points that you have in a turn. That amount is equal to the initiative roll divided by 2 rounded up. So if that is the roll for the Athenian player, for example, that player this turn will have 5 action points, and suppose that the Spartan player rolled an 8, so the Spartan player has 4. Then the action phase starts, starting with the initiative player. Players will alternate spending action points. When it is your turn to spend action points, you must spend at least one, but you can spend as many as you want, but of course as many as you have. Then the game goes to the next player, who will do the same. Also will have to spend at least one action point to execute actions on the board, and players will alternate spending points that way until both players go down to 0 action points. At that point, the action phase for that turn is over and you move to the next phase. To activate an area that contains a leader, you spend one action point. To activate an area without a leader, you must spend 2 action points. Units in the activated areas can move up to their movement factor. They can move by land, moving from an adjacent land area to the next one, but they must end their movement when they enter an area containing enemy units. Land units may also move amphibiously, basically moving through naval units up to the amount of combat factors of the naval units that are being used for movement. For example, here we have 16 points, and that means that they can be transported by 20 points of naval units. And sometimes you may need to build chains or bridges of naval units to be able to transport your land units where you need them to go. Naval units can move by an unlimited number of sea areas, but they also must stop when they enter an area containing naval units of the opponent. After all movement is completed, you resolve combat in all areas that contain units of both players, but the attacker at this point must spend one action point to declare attacks. For all attacks on the board, it is one action point, but you must pay that, because if you did not save an action point for that, then you cannot declare attacks, your units are all reduced and must retreat without resolving combat. That is a huge penalty, so you just must make sure that you do save that action point before you launch attacks on the board. Naval and land combat are resolved on the same combat table, which is unusual, but somehow it works. You calculate the ratio between the combat strength of the attacker and that of the defender. Then you take into account a series of modifiers. There are 13 possible modifiers that may result in column shifts or modifiers to the die roll. So you roll a die and you will find the result on the table. The results on the right of the hyphen apply to the defender, and the results on the left of the hyphen apply to the attacker. E means eliminated, R means nothing happens. If you find a fraction like 3/4, half, that is the percentage of units of that side that lose a step. You round that percentage down in the advantage of the side that is taking the hit or hits, but you always have to inflict at least one hit if there is a numerical result. For example, if we have this result, the attacker will have half of his units reduced by 1 step, and the defender will have a unit out of 4 reduced by 1 step. Also, as you can see, some results are printed in bold. That means that that side is the winner of the engagement and the opponent must retreat from the area of the fight. So sometimes you can see that the two sides receive the same amount of damage in terms of step losses, but I guess that one of the two sides managed to retain better morale and force the opponent to retreat. After combat, you check supplies, which are very important for victory conditions. The only units that you need to check supplies for are Athenian units in Pylos and Spartan units on the island of Sphacterie. Everybody else on the map is fine, it is in supply. If the Athenian player has units in there and the Spartan player controls the sea areas I and H, then those units are out of supply and the Athenian player loses a point of supply. Each player starts with 3 points of supply. If the Spartan player has units on this island and the Athenian player controls this sea area here and this one, then these units are out of supply and the Spartan player player loses a point of supply, you regain a point of supply if you have less than 3, and at the beginning of the next supply phase, your units are in supply. But if that doesn't happen and your supply marker goes all the way down to 0, then this is pretty big because you lose the game immediately. That is instant death. If instant death is not achieved, then you will have to play the game for 7 turns. At the end of turn 7, you check to see if one of your players has achieved total victory, which you achieve if you have an obsolete unit in pillars, another one in this area, and one in this area, which is pretty much why the players are still keeping units in this dangerous area, dangerous for supplies, even though by doing so, and precisely by doing so, they are putting themselves in danger of remaining out of supplies. But still, you have to fight for those areas. If neither player meets that victory condition, then you count victory points that are assigned for control of these areas and for elimination of enemy units. The system has a couple of neat things that I really enjoy. I like the action system. I like how you can spend action points in different ways, in different areas of the map. I like the combat table. I like having a simple unified system for both naval and land units, and a system that somehow works. One thing that I am a little more skeptical about regarding the system is the role to assign action points at the beginning of each turn, because that role doesn't have a self-correcting mechanism. If you roll low your entire game, you get a very small amount of action points each turn, you cannot do much, and the opponent rolls high his entire game, the opponent will crush you, and you will be a sitting duck because there isn't anything you can do against that. You cannot save action points from turn to turn. Maybe that could have been an interesting option to explore. So if this turn I rolled poorly and I cannot do anything, then I can save my actions for later. I get better chances of doing stuff later, but that is not an option here. And again, there's nothing that can correct a bad roll. If you roll poorly now, there's nothing that gives you better chances of rolling better in the future. And that die roll has such a huge impact on gameplay that I just wonder if that single die roll has been given too much importance in this game. The game does not have many units. You've seen the map, there aren't many areas. You may not have many resources. Maybe in a turn you will have 2, 3, 4 action points total, and when you think that it takes you just 2 action points to activate a single area without a leader, an action point to declare attacks, you see that in many cases you won't be able to activate many people. This means that, again, in a game that has such a small amount of elements, the next decision is very often quite obvious. You just have 2 action points, there's one area that you can attack. What should you do? You spend them to attack that area. You concentrate powerful attacks against those few areas that are available at that point that you're able to attack because of the resources that you're given, the very rigid reinforcement sequence. So in a certain way, the game feels a little scripted, not so much because there are specific rules that you have to follow turn after turn to make history go a certain way, but just because the events present themselves in a certain obvious way. And this to me is probably the biggest limitation of the game, that is that I didn't have the feeling that I was agonizing over tough decisions. What I should have been doing given the circumstances at any point in the game seemed pretty easy to identify. On the plus side, not much analysis paralysis. On the other side, again, not gut-wrenching moments of deep excitement. So to me, this game works pretty well as an exemplification of the historical events, as an extra way of looking at the way in which events developed historically. As a game per se, it is not one that I found extremely exciting to play. Still, I still see potential in the system. I really still think that the system can work well, and I have high hopes for Syracuse. I looked at the map, and the map really looks interesting. So I'm still very, very excited about the next game, because I hope that in that game the system will come to life fully, and the potential of the system will reach its fullness, but we will see that. I'm going to play the next game now, and as soon as I play it enough and I have enough familiarity to feel comfortable sharing my opinions with you, I will certainly do in my next video.